If you want to change who we are, stay where you are. Don't come here. I think what she said was really un-American in so many ways, in that she was siding with Hamas in the answer to a question about Taiwan as she walked her way through genocide. I could use the word equality, but I don't think equality is what they want. They want a equal distribution of the resources of this country. That's, I call equalness. The immigration issue that we see in Europe cannot be a foreshadowing of what we have at home.
Hello and welcome to the Washington Examiner's In Focus podcast. I'm Senior Editor Peter Laffin, and I'm very excited to be joined today by Senator Tim Scott. So, Senator, we've talked a number of times in recent years about a number of topics, but no matter what we're talking about, we always seem to end up talking about Jesus, who he said he was, who he is, what he did, why it's the most important thing that could ever happen. And every time we talk about Jesus, you always end up saying something that sort of rearranges the furniture in my mind. And so I thought if you could indulge me this morning, I'm very curious, what's the Lord been speaking to you in prayer recently about this moment we're in as Americans and as Christians?
Thank you, Peter, for such a good question. And thank God Almighty that He works in your heart and my heart as well, as it relates to changing the furniture in the room, and sometimes throwing it out and getting new furniture for me, because He's always bringing more consciousness to specific areas of my life. And recently I've been working around Matthew 22:37 through 39, where it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And on the first part, Chaplain Barry Black at the Senate once asked a question: how do you love the Lord your God with your whole heart, with your whole mind? And my answer was, you just do it. And his answer was, it's a little more complicated than that. And he took me down this road that it is our responsibility to develop every facet of our being, to include our minds. And so if you are not engaging in critical thought, then you're actually not fully participating in the opportunity in Matthew 22:37 to love the Lord your God with all of your mind. And so I've spent the last several months thinking through how that applies to our nation, and frankly, to me first, and then to the nation as well, and my role in the nation. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is the importance of our foundational documents, and specifically the Declaration of Independence, and how our forefathers, imperfect and flawed, wrote it right. And sometimes it's easier to write than to live. And what they wrote was that all men are created equal, and that our rights, inalienable rights, come from a creator. That is perhaps, as Walter Isaacson says, the greatest sentence ever written, so to speak. I paraphrased it. And why is that so important? Because it actually changed everything we understand about existence. That if we are equal one to the other in the eyes of God, then we are equal to each other. And as we wrestle with our 250th anniversary, one of the thoughts I've been pondering is the truth of that concept, that we are equal as brothers and sisters, not just to God, but according to our founding fathers and our founding documents, to each other. So there is no superior race. There is no superior zip code. That God doesn't give out talent or brain power by zip codes or by complexion or melanin in your skin. He does so out of his infinite wisdom, and he gives it across the board. And as a nation blessed with diversity, we should embrace that concept as a nation if we want to see another 250 years. And at the same time, there are some seeds in the soil, according to Galatians 6:7. Whatever you sow, you will reap. Verse 9 says, if you wait long enough, you're going to get a harvest. And one of the things that I think we should be careful of is not departing from our foundation as it relates to our values. That our values as a nation, and frankly, as a Western Alliance, is built on the Judeo-Christian ethos. That tells us who we are. And anytime you want to introduce a new value system or a new proposition, contrary to the one that you have, you are now in conflict. And that tension shows up in immigration policy, it shows up in our economics, it shows up in the path to socialism. We have to be very careful not to allow this nation to wander off in multiple directions, assuming that we're going to get to the same destination. It doesn't work that way. You have to have one purpose, one mission, and one value system if we are to succeed. Anyone from anywhere can come to this nation if they want to add value to who we are. If you want to change who we are, stay where you are. Don't come here. And I think that's a really important part of what I've been wrestling with is that if we are going to figure out how to love the Lord in this nation with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, we have to develop our minds and understand what makes us unique, what makes us remarkable, what makes us amazing. It's not who we are, it's whose we are.
I think that the point you make about us being equal to one another and how we need to reemphasize that now at our 250th birthday is very important. I worry that we don't have a unifying narrative anymore the way we used to. And I appreciate the way you answer that, saying it's not what we are, it's whose we are, who we belong to, and that
Yes.
we are a Judeo-Christian culture. I know from talking to you in the past that you have bipartisan prayer meetings with
Yes.
other senators. And to me, that when you told me that, that was very inspiring because what we're lacking in our identity is that unifying narrative to rally around. And perhaps you could describe to our audience what that bipartisan prayer is and perhaps how that leads us to that point of unification.
Yeah, I do a Bible study every Thursday at noon with a number of Republicans, to include the leader, and a few Democrats as well. And what we learned there is really about the truth of the gospel. We don't talk about partisan politics because, frankly, being a Christian doesn't mean you're a Republican, doesn't mean you're a Democrat. You might be agnostic to politics, but you love Jesus and you accept him as your personal Lord and Savior. And that's part of the benefit of being an American is that you live in a culture where we don't have to believe the same things the same ways and apply them in order for us to believe in the same risen Savior. Important. I do believe, however, that finding that common ground in faith allows for us to have confidence in the debate, even when we strongly disagree with the other side. If we can think that the other person is of good conscience, wants the best for this nation, wants the best for their family, like I do, we can continue to fight over where we go as a nation. I think the conservative approach, the conservative value proposition is the most powerful force for good. And I believe that it's embedded in Matthew 25. My friends on the other side might use Matthew 25 and say you should meet all the needs of the people. And I would say that's true up until you get to Proverbs 22:7, that the borrower is slave to the lender. And so there's a limit on what we can do. And there is something around individual responsibility. But these are things that we should debate. We should not be afraid to debate the principles that we find in our founding documents, which is, by the way, founded upon the rock of a Judeo-Christian ethos. And so we know where to point to find out where universal truth lies. It lies within John 8:31-32. And it has seeped into our founding documents, which I think is the most powerful story that we don't always appreciate in 2026.
Yeah, and at least that debate, that conversation is grounded in values that we can all agree on, whether it's the founding
Yes.
documents, whether it's scripture, and steering the national conversation back toward that place that unifies us, that we're based on, I think is so important moving forward. But enough with bipartisanship for now. Um,
Yes.
I need to know your reaction to what we witnessed in Munich over the weekend. We had an unbelievable split screen between Marco Rubio's speech and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's. What were your reactions to not just their remarks, but how they contrasted?
Well, listen, if you have a split screen up with AOC on one side and Marco Rubio on the other side, you can see one, a departure from American values, and two, the reinforcement of American values by Marco Rubio. He was quite statesman. She was confused. He was clear. She was disillusioned. He was direct. I think what she said was really un-American in so many ways, in that she was siding with Hamas in the answer to a question about Taiwan as she walked her way through genocide and trying to answer a question about Taiwan, which I fully did not understand whatsoever. But what it pointed out, though, was a value proposition that is consistent with so many of the leaders on the liberal side, where they think socialism and condoning violence is okay because it leads to the right end. And frankly, those of us tethered to the America as we know it today, sometimes we have to improve what we know today, but the fact of the matter is we still founded upon the right principles and values. And Marco Rubio did a fantastic job of talking about this Western alliance that depends on the foundation of Christian values. I mean, he didn't infer it. He explicitly stated it multiple times. It is the shared values that makes this Western alliance the marvel of the world. It is this notion that all men were created equal, endowed by a creator with inalienable rights that has really allowed for us to have the longest time of prosperity with human freedom being the nexus for that. Whereas what she talked about was so confusing at times. I didn't know what she was talking about. But for Americans to be able to watch that contrast on one screen, we on the conservative side can breathe a sigh of relief that if the best they have is AOC and Mamdani, with socialism embedded in their philosophy, we are on the right side of justice, on the right side of history. But we're going to have to fight tooth and nail because too many people today, especially younger people, are believing in socialism, in part, I think, because what they want is equalness. Equalness and fairness sometimes are on two different sides. And I could use the word equality, but I don't think equality is what they want. They want a equal distribution of the resources of this country. That's I call equalness versus fairness, which means that you are rewarded by the efforts that you put into the marketplace. It doesn't make you a better person because you have more money, but it does mean that you are more productive, typically speaking, and of greater value to the overall ecosystem of economics in America. And we want to continue to encourage people to work hard, to produce more, and to benefit from their labor, as opposed to what AOC, Mamdani, and other socialists believe that somehow, some way, the world is so unfair that the only way to make it fair is to equally divide the resources of the country. That's just consistent with their philosophy and inconsistent with the history of America. And Peter, I'll say, as a kid who grew up in poverty, the one thing I can tell you about America's system of free markets and capitalism is that the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I'm sitting here as proof that this system works for everyone, particularly now in a way that it didn't previously, but it certainly does right now. And we want to make it even better for more people by focusing on our foundational principles, not by departing from them.
Well, I think you're right to say that it was difficult, to put it charitably, difficult to parse out what AOC was getting at. But you can find what she's saying in little snippets. You can find her worldview. In one instance that really stood out to me was she was slamming Rubio's speech. And she said this, she said, well, that was just an appeal to Western culture. And she did the little air quotes thing as
Yeah.
if, Western culture is some inherently bad thing that we should be embarrassed of. I thought that was an unbelievably revealing weekend for all the reasons that you just mentioned. Um, but there was some controversy on the right as well about Secretary Rubio's speech. I like you, I think it was one of the better ones that we hear from an American statesman on a global
Yes.
stage. But some conservatives didn't love it because they perceived it to be insufficiently tough on Europe, particularly in how it framed America's and Europe's destinies as being intertwined. What do you make of that criticism?
Well, listen, I think people, listen, I believe in the philosophy articulated by Marco Rubio, so I don't take to heart the criticism. I will say this, though, and I think this is really important from my perspective, that the truth of the matter is a simple one, that President Trump has engaged across the globe in order to make America safer at home. And in that engagement, he has been able to put out fires in Africa and Asia, and he's trying to put out a fire in Europe. He's dealt, I think, well with South America. And frankly, what you see is if your goal is the same and your aim is clear, keeping Americans safe and America first, not America only, but America first, then you recognize and appreciate the importance of strategic partnerships around the world. And frankly, President Trump has done a good job of saying to Europe, you're not paying your fair share. He said it in the first administration and he said it in the second administration. What have they done? They've stepped up to the plate. Why? Because given enough pressure, our partners can do more and they're now doing more because it's in their best interest and frankly our mutual best interest. So I actually appreciate what Marco said and how he articulated it. And for those who disagree, I would just say that fundamentally, for America to be first and to be safe requires allies across the world, and we should choose them wisely. And a part of what I think he was saying too, and he said it very clearly, Peter, is that the immigration issue that we see in Europe cannot be a foreshadowing of what we have at home. And that's why we celebrate success of President Trump's closed borders and why we are so focused on eliminating illegal immigration in America, because we can see what it's done there and how that distortion of the value system has a strong impact on what we ultimately are able to accomplish together. You've got to have integrity in your borders. You've got to have a clear mission, single mission, and then you have to execute accordingly. And I think Marco Rubio did a really good job of saying that the word he used, by the way, was we. It's the kind of word that you want to lean into as opposed to y'all need to do it better. I'm sure they don't say y'all outside the South, but we do it here in South Carolina. Y'all have to do better. He said, we must maintain this Western alliance for the health and the well-being of the world, but also for us as well. He just said that so well in so many different ways that I find it hard to criticize what he said and even how he said it.
So shifting to domestic politics, it's safe to say that
But
2025 was a big year for you. You assumed the role of the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee and chairman of the RNSC. A year into these big changes, what is something you can say that you learned about our government and the Republican Party that maybe you didn't know before you took these roles?
Well, listen, thankfully I don't need a lot of sleep. So doing two chairmanships like no one's done in a long, long time, decades, I can see why they don't do it. But I will say that it's been a lot of fun, invigorating. And one of the lessons I've learned on the NRSC side, re-election side, 22 incumbents or red seats, and trying to add four more seats to it according to my map: Minnesota, New Hampshire, Georgia, and Michigan. Uh, Americans have a whole lot in common. And frankly, I find it exciting that no matter where I go, there's this conviction that we have to lean into our future by voting now. That has been a powerful force for good for my soul, that so many Americans believe in the America that we have today. On the banking side, I'll say one of the things I've learned there is that the marvel of our free market systems. Because of our economic dominance around the world, people desperately want resources from America. They respect our banking system, which of course is our sanction system. And so keeping ourselves at the top of the food chain economically is one of the most effective ways of keeping more Americans safe here at home.
How are we doing? Are we on the top of the food chain? Are you more hopeful about our economic condition
Economically,
now? Yes.
yeah, yeah. So let's do a compare. Let's do a split screen on Trump versus Biden. The Biden years, we were losing about $1,000 a month in spending power. Inflation got as high as 9%. I think it was June or July of 2021. As inflation goes up, interest rates climbed, making homes less affordable for the average American across the country. President Trump inherits this massive hole, and he starts filling that hole very quickly. And in 13 months, he's done a fabulous job of filling the economic hole caused by Joe Biden and to some extent the Federal Reserve and their inaction and politicalization at the Federal Reserve. And so President Trump has, number one, brought the prices down. Listen, gas has not been this cheap in 5 years. You think about where we are on housing affordability. President Trump is working night and day to make housing more affordable. Today, the first-time home buyer is about 40 years old. I believe because of some of the initiatives from the banking committee, we passed housing reform 24-0 out of the banking committee, and the whole Senate voted for it. I believe that we are on the precipice of real change in housing affordability because President Trump is going to embed within the construct or the legislation real change that will make it easier and more affordable for the average American. At the same time, I think the headwinds that we face come from high interest rates. I think the Fed needs to adjust the interest rates. Hopefully, Kevin Warsh, the next federal chair, will have that same approach if we're lucky, and we'll see housing affordability become a reality. And frankly, as interest rates go down and gas prices go down, everything becomes more affordable because almost everything is brought to you or your grocery store or your restaurant by gas. And if interest rates are lower, more people can afford homes, so the more construction happens. And for a very long time, decades now, we measure the success of our economy in part by home construction.
Tell me if this is your impression of things. It seems as if we've gotten a lot of good economic news in the past few months, especially in the past few weeks, but the public mood remains pretty sour on the
Yeah.
economy. And this is going to be the great challenge for Republicans in the midterms is to connect maybe the reality of the data to how people are feeling. Is that how you see the central challenge for this midterm cycle?
Yeah, I think it's perception versus reality, to be succinct. The perception of our economic reality is very, very off. The reality of economics in America, they're getting better. Let me give you two really important points here. Number one, wages are growing faster than inflation, which makes everything more affordable. Number two, the tax cuts that we just extended will save Americans $5 trillion over the next 10 years. But let's bring it home to the kitchen table. Because of no tax on tips, a $25,000 tax credit, that puts $6,000, $7,000 more in your pocket if you are a person waiting tables. If you're working overtime trying to make your ends meet, like I used to as a younger fella, I will simply say that no tax on overtime makes your life more affordable for 80% of our senior citizens on Social Security because of the tax credits on Social Security income. You will not pay taxes on your Social Security. For those who have kids at home, because of our tax credit, increasing our tax credit to $2,200, you now have more money to take care of your family. For those small business owners, you have 100% depreciation made permanent. You now have more money up front to spend on hiring more people and investing in your business. For those who are investing in real estate, we have opportunity zones made permanent. There is so much meat on the bones that the perception of this economy is distorted by national news that seems to want to elect a Democrat. Uh, that is unfortunately my appraisal of where we are as a nation. But the good news of wage growth, tax cuts, interest rates have started to come down, homes becoming more affordable right around the corner, gas prices at a 5-year low. You go to the grocery store, you see more things more affordable. It seems like we as a party, we need to stay focused on telling our story of affordability. And the national media, it would be nice if they would deliver the facts without their narrative.
So for the midterm, we're coming up, what, 9 months away, and
Yes.
forecasts are all over the map. But generally speaking, it's always kind of hard on the party in power, and it looks like it could be a tough year for Republicans. What is your hope for the outcomes of these elections in the Senate and beyond? What would a good election cycle look like to you?
Well, let's just, as you said, Peter, really important for us to reinforce what you just said, that for the last 70 years or so, on average, the Senate loses 3.4 seats when in power at the White House. So we're running against history. I think we're going to beat history. 3.4 seats means we're in the minority. My primary objective is to defy history by staying in the majority. My second objective is to maintain the 53 current seats that we have, which means winning these 22 red seats that we have to defend. That means Maine, which is blue, not purple, blue seat held by Susan Collins, and North Carolina, which is a purple seat that we have Michael Whatley running in that seat. In order for us to be successful, we must win those two seats. And then we also have to be successful in Iowa, Ohio, and Alaska, three competitive seats that we hold today. In order to expand the map, we have to turn our attention to Michigan, where Mike Rogers is doing a fantastic job, and we are very optimistic that he will be successful. We have John Sununu, the former senator for New Hampshire, running again, and we are very optimistic about his success. And then we have Georgia, that should be a red seat. We have three candidates. We need to get it down to one candidate as soon as possible. And if we are able to do so, we have a chance to be successful there. But as long as we have three candidates, it's going to be tougher for us. And then you turn your attention to Minnesota, where the Somali fraud has been so disgusting that it's turned off a ton of voters, that we have a chance to pick up that seat. And Michelle Tafoya is going to is a great candidate, and she's going to have an opportunity to bring that back to the red side. My prediction is that we end up with at least 53 seats, and with a little luck, I think we can get to 54 and maybe 55.
Wow. So, who's a candidate you're really excited about? Who fits the mold of who you think a successful Republican candidate in this cycle looks like?
Well, it's hard to say. If we're going to expand the map, Mike Rogers is doing a fabulous job. If you think about who he is, former FBI agent, a lot of time on the Intelligence Committee in the House of Representatives, a true American patriot who loves the country with actual sacrifice for the country. I think he's an amazing candidate who deserves to be a senator because he would serve the country even at his own expense. I think about Dan Sullivan, a Marine, Alaska, an incumbent who's working really hard to defend the homeland at a place of great vulnerability in Alaska. And he has done a great job. He's at 65 or 70 town halls. He flies back to Alaska more regularly than most people fly back to their home states. And he does so because, A, he loves his state. He loves being home. And he loves campaigning because he understands that the firewall for the United States of America might just be the United States Senate. So he's doing everything he possibly can. So from an incumbent perspective, it's hard to overlook someone like Dan Sullivan or Susan Collins, who has learned how to walk to the beat of a different drummer as a Republican, because she represents a state that is different than South Carolina, but she represents Maine in the way that they deserve. She's far more moderate than I am, but she is consistent with her state. And so we need to have a big tent party that's tethered to the same value system.
Is there a candidate nominee on the Democratic side you've been particularly impressed with, or somebody who you think, wow, maybe that person's a little harder to beat than I thought?
Well, listen, I think John Ossoff is not impressive, but he has raised nearly $25 million in 6 months, probably the top fundraiser of the cycle. But he is also the most vulnerable Democrat on the ballot. So I don't think of him as impressive, but he has a lot of money.
Okay, well, that can
That's
become
impressive.
impressive pretty quick.
Yes,
Well,
unfortunately.
Senator, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope you come back and talk to us again soon before the midterms.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Peter. God bless you. We'll see you soon.
God bless you.